Mr. Millay, and here is your review for United States College U.S. history. And most important thing you need to know about the French-Indian Wars and the wars for North America between the French and the British. Absolutely important that you know about that. Know about the George Washington's actions during the French-Indian War, the Albany Congress, Albany Planning Union, all that stuff. There'll be a picture of that Benjamin Franklin Join or Die cartoon. Make sure you know about that. So all of these will be in there. Know about William Pitt, James Wolfe, the battles of Quebec, the Treaty of Paris. Know why George Washington quit the Army after this war was over, because he was treated badly since he was an American and not British. Make sure you know about Pontiac's Rebellion and what that led to. Alright? Then you need to make sure that you can talk about mercantilism. Absolutely need to know about mercantilism. It is going to be on the test for sure. Remember mercantilism? The idea that British colonists or American colonists existed to give the British money, to make money for the crown. That's what the purpose of colonies were, was to make money for the mother country, to bring all the gold in and get very little of it back out. Make all the money. Alright, there's a video about mercantilism and the triangular trade on your YouTube channel. Make sure you can talk about good things from mercantilism, bad things from mercantilism. Make sure you can tell me why, what salutary neglect was. Sir Walpole and his idea that if you leave the Americans alone, they'll be better off. Make sure you know what the Navigation Acts were. Sorry about that. And why the Navigation Acts were not successful. Make sure you can name some of these enumerated products, products that were listed specifically, could only be shipped to Great Britain, like sugar, tobacco, indigo, things like that. Make sure you know how manufacturing was hindered by mercantilism. Know what writs of assistance were, that system where they could have basically warrants that never expired on Americans. That was very unfair. Know who James Otis was. George Grenville, make sure you know about him. He was a prime minister that really said we're going to push the Navigation Acts. And the reason he wanted to do that, which is because Britain was $140 million in debt, and $70 million, half of that, was from the colonists. Make sure you know about King George III. Not a very old king at the time, very new to the throne, surrounded by corrupt officials, yes men. Know a little bit about him. The Sugar Act, which actually made taxes cheaper than they used to be, but they started enforcing them. It said we're going to actually enforce them, tried to enforce them, couldn't work out. Quartering Act, make sure you know what that was, and then we get to the big ones. Make sure you can tell me what was taxed by the Stamp Act, the Townshend Act, and the Tea Act. The Stamp Act was a tax on all paper, goods, newspapers, diplomas, marriage certificates, playing cards, anything. So any newspapers, any legal documents, things like that would end up in as a thing that was taxed. Make sure you can talk about admiralty courts, and there's just no juries. Burden of proof is on the defendant if you're guilty until proven innocent. All that stuff. It was no bueno. So make sure you can talk about that. Make sure you can talk about virtual representation and what that meant. The Stamp Act Congress and the repeal of the Stamp Act. Make sure you can tell me about the Sons of Liberty, people like Sam Adams, people like Paul Revere, things like that. Make sure you know who Lord Rockingham was. He was George Grenville's replacement. The Declaratory Act, what it was an act to try to just save a little pride on Britain's part. Hey, we could tax you. We don't want to right now, but if we wanted to, we could totally tax you. Make sure you know about the Townshend Act. That was a tax, very small tax on tea, lead, paper, paint, silk, and glass. All right? Make sure you know that. But it was seen as a big deal. People didn't like it because almost everybody drank tea. It was seen as a big deal for all the colonists. It was huge, and it was seen as a uniting thing because everybody drank tea, whether you're rich or poor. So that was big. Make sure you know who John Dickinson was. He's one that wrote Letters from a Farmer in Pennsylvania. Make sure you can tell me about the Boston Massacre. I put that in quotation marks because it wasn't much of a massacre, only 5 people killed. But we watched a movie over it. Make sure you can tell me all about it, what happens. We're gonna have a lot of information on that. Make sure that you can tell me about the Tea Act and how that led to the Boston Tea Party. All right, and that comes from the British East India Company being given a monopoly, even though that was cheaper than tea would have been otherwise. The British East India Company was given a monopoly, and the colonists said, just because it's cheaper doesn't mean it's fair. We won't put up with this. Our principles are more important than price. Principles more important than price. That's the thing we're going to talk about in class. Make sure that you can talk about that and how it led to the Boston Tea Party. You know, this guy's kind of like Indians, but not really, and that led to more British troops being sent to the Americas. And the Intolerable Acts. These are the last straw. These Intolerable Acts. Make sure you can talk about them. The Coercive Acts, the Boston Port Act, which closed the harbor until damages were paid and law and order restored. The Massachusetts Charter revoking. Make sure you can talk about the Administration of Justice Act, which sent any royal soldier or official accused of crimes over to England. And they'd be tried in England, and the Americans never even knew if they were found guilty or not. It was, you know, not fair. The Quebec Act, which was not part of the Intolerable Acts, but what it was seen as one of them. What it did and why people didn't like it. Make sure you can talk about the First Continental Congress. Why it was created. What was its original purpose, which was not to break away, but to try to say, hey, King, we don't want to break away. Let's work something out. Let's compromise. And they originally wanted to stay British. Make sure you can talk about that. Lexington and Concord. Make sure you can talk about Lexington and Concord. What happened there? Is that shot heard around the world? How, you know, why was that important? Why was it called the shot heard around the world? Make sure you can tell me the strengths and weaknesses of Great Britain and the strengths and weaknesses of Americans. We had a lot of strengths. We had a lot of weaknesses. And make sure you can talk to me about the fact that, you know, revolution. We not did the Declaration of Independence until well after war had been declared. So we've been fighting for a long time before we finally said, hey, we declare ourselves independent. We're not putting up with you guys anymore. So if you study all those things, you'll be doing just fine on the test.